also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, is over 250R. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest is Julian Assange. He's joining us from London, where he held a news conference on Saturday with his organization WikiLeaks, the whistleblower website that has released close to 400,000 military documents, the largest leak in U.S. history about the Iraq War. Now, Julian, I wanted to play for you some of the comments coming from the military, WikiLeaks being criticized for releasing these documents. This is what, well, the disgraced General Stanley McChrystal, the former commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan, who also ran special operations forces during the surge in Iraq, had to say about the Iraq war logs on the eve of their release.
I think first, the decision by anybody to leak classified information is something that not only is it illegal, it's also something that that individual is making judgments about the value of that information and the threat to comrades that almost nobody is qualified to make that judgment. So if somebody leaks information that puts me or one of my soldiers at risk, I think that's a level of irresponsibility that's very upsetting. Then there's the decision to release them widely. I also am not comfortable with that either. I think that a level of responsibility towards our people needs to be balanced with any argument for a need or right to know. I can't judge every single piece of information. I wouldn't try to. But I would say that there has to be that balance and there has to be that level of maturity, because it's likely that the leak of some of that information could cause death of our own people or some of our allies.
That was General Stanley McChrystal, the former commander of the U.S. and NATO force in Afghanistan. His view was echoed by other soldiers farther down the chain of command. This is Private First Class David Service, who's stationed in northern Iraq.
I don't think anybody who's managed to access classified information should share it, as far as regarding the safety of the soldiers or the people it could be affecting. But when you get into the Iraqis have, it's a violent culture. We've been doing our best to help them with the problems that they're having.
And back in Washington, Pentagon spokesperson Jeff Morrell also lashed out at WikiLeaks for releasing the war logs.
The bottom line is our forces are still very much in danger here as a result of this exposure, given the fact that our tactics, techniques, and procedures are exposed in these documents, and our enemies are undoubtedly going to try to use them against us and making their jobs even more difficult and dangerous.
That's Pentagon spokesperson Jeff Morrell. Julian Assange, your response.
Well, this is the same old argument that the Pentagon has been trotting out every time there is media exposure of their abuses for the past 50 years. They tried it with the Afghan war logs. Last week, NATO told CNN from Kabul that there was not a single case of an Afghan that they could find who needed moving or protection. The Pentagon Secretary of Defense Gates wrote to the U.S. Senate in Armed Services Committee privately on August the 16th, saying that no intelligence sources, sensitive intelligence sources or methods had been revealed by this material, while saying publicly something completely different. Similarly, the Pentagon stated last week that it could find no incidents of an Afghan who had been adversely affected by this release or the injury to any U.S. troops. The reality is that the only thing at risk here is the reputations and the jobs of those individuals who put troops in harm's way in Iraq and who put Iraqi citizens in the middle of a civil war. Late last week, the Pentagon was pushing out the message that they had found 300 names in this material of people who needed protecting. But that, in fact, is misleading rhetoric. What they had found was 300 names in their internal material, which they say needed protecting. But the Department of Defense confessed yesterday that, in fact, none of those 300 names were present in our material. So on the one hand, we see no credible evidence of harm being committed. We also see the Pentagon making a position that it's not really involved in Iraq anymore. Well, we all know that there's 50,000 US forces presently in Iraq, and over 100,000 US military contractors. So that argument it can't stand up on both accounts. But when we look to see what happened with the Afghan experience, we see no one harmed by this, apart from the reputation of an abusive organisation who is not credible, who's been sown time and time again, not just by our work, but by others, to make statements that are simply not credible. And so that is the lack of harm. So then we look at the other side of the equation. What is the possible benefit? Can this material save lives? Can it improve the quality of life in Iraq? Can it tend to shape our perceptions of how war should and should not be conducted? Can it shape our perceptions of who should be conducting war and in what manner? And the answer to that is a clear yes. We see serious consideration and calls for investigation by the top levels of the United Kingdom government. That is the correct response to the revelation of this type of material. You know, it must be disturbing to Iraqis to see this sort of revelation, which reveals 15,000 civilian casualties that were never previously reported, 66,000 internally declared total, but 15,000 that are not present in any media reports since 2003. To hear the Pentagon take such a cavalier attitude to the discovery, the public discovery of 6 9/11s, the equivalent death count of 6 9/11s, and you know, it really, the Pentagon is to be seen as a credible institution. Every country needs a military to defend it, but if it's to be seen as a credible in that role, it needs to also be a responsive institution. All these reports were made secret at the time that they were written. Without doubt, nearly all of them should not be secret now. That time has elapsed. They're not of tactical significance, and yet they are still concealed. So what is the purpose of concealing them?
What are the documents you're talking about are still concealed?
Well, essentially all this material, all these 400,000 reports have been kept by the Pentagon. The only reason that the public is seeing them now is that some brave soldier or soldiers stepped forward to give us this material and get it out into the public domain where it can shape public policy and do some good. And
not only Britain has responded, saying they are calling for an investigation, but the latest news right now out of Denmark, I believe let's see if I can find it here. The Danish Prime Minister, Lars Rasmussen, promised all allegations according to which Danish soldiers may have knowingly handed over detainees in Iraq to mistreatment at the hands of local authorities are regarded as very serious. But the Prime Minister also rejected calls by the opposition to establish an independent commission to investigate the claims. Have you, Julian Assange, redacted any of these close to 400,000 documents? And how did you communicate with the Pentagon beforehand?
Yeah, so we look at the claims made by the Pentagon last week that they saw 300 names in this material. Well, that was their material, and they admit early this week that in what we released, there are none of those 300 names, none whatsoever. So we went through a harm minimization process like we do with every release of our material, and we asked when dealing at the time in dealing with Afghanistan, and after for the Pentagon and the ISAF's assistance in this. The Pentagon stated to us very clearly, including in a letter from the DoD's chief counsel, that they were not interested in harm minimization. They were not an organisation that were interested in harm minimization, and they would not be assisting us, and they were only interested in fact, demanding under the threat of compulsion that we return and destroy all of this.
Can you explain Frago 242 and 039 and how U.S. leadership might be implicated in torture?
Well, Frago 242 is a classified order that we managed to discover after reviewing this material. It wasn't included in the material itself, but we managed to explore it and get it from some of our sources that shows that an order that the U.S. military not intervene in these cases of Iraqi police and Iraqi officials committing torture. We can also see cases where people have been deliberately handed over to some of the most abusive groups, most abusive police groups in Iraq, in what looks to be an intentional sort of torture laundering, a sort of internal torture rendition in Iraq. Now, there's an extraordinary piece of footage which we included in the Channel 4 documentary that was released yesterday on this subject of the Chief of Staff at a press conference with Donald Rumsfeld responding to a question by a reporter along these lines of what action US forces must take if they see torture or other forms of abuse. The Chief of Staff said, well, that they must intervene where they can, and was corrected by Donald Rumsfeld in saying no, they don't have to intervene. And in fact, it turns out that Rumsfeld was right, and presumably Rumsfeld knew the existence of this Order 242 much better than the Chief of Staff, because he had been involved in the drafting of that order.